Howdy, and welcome to our series on economic and legal considerations for hemp production in Texas. I'm George, and today I'm going to talk to you about growing hemp, and not so much the agronomics, but some of the considerations for growing each type of hemp for its end use. I'm going to start off with some words that some producers from around the country shared with me in their experience of growing hemp. And the very first one was vet everyone and anyone you deal with. This was a common theme. It's not that different for a nascent industry, one that's just beginning, to have some players in there that might be bad actors. And it takes a while for them to get those players shook out of the industry. And so it's important that you make sure you're working with a reputable seed contractor, wherever you're getting your seed from. Important that you have a reputable processor on the back end once you harvest your hemp to know that they're going to be able to take it and pay you. And if you have a contract, it's important that you know what you're responsible for and if there's any outs for the contractor where they can get out of the contract. Point 2 and 3 there kind of work together. It's, don't put more money into hemp than you can afford to lose and start out small. This is a new plant that we'll be growing in Texas for most folks. And with that, there's a lot of knowledge that has to be gained. And there's a lot of things that can go wrong. There's nuances to hemp that aren't necessarily true with other crops. For example, your wheat can't suddenly turn into something that's illegal, which can happen if your hemp goes over the allowable level of THC. So you could have a hot crop. You could have it destroyed or not be able to get a stand. You could grow it all the way to the end, deliver it to the processor, and maybe the processor goes bankrupt, which we've seen a lot around the country. There's been a lot of processors who have gone bankrupt. So all of these things would lend you to kind of start out small, get the process down, learn how to grow it in your particular region, and then you can expand from there if you like. The last bullet point is the hardest thing I've ever done in all my years of farming. This was an experienced farmer. Said he had so much to learn about growing it in the industry as a whole. But at the end of the day, he did say he enjoyed the challenge and enjoyed growing the hemp. Hemp is mainly, let's say, kind of defined for the purpose of its end use. And so for this, I'm going to say fiber, seed for either grain or replication, and cannabinoids, CBDs and others. Other cannabinoids are starting to come on like CBG, CBN. But for this particular talk, I'm going to talk about CBD and seed for grain. And realizing there are dual use purpose hemps on the market, and people are growing hemp for dual use or multi-purpose use. But today, I'm going to stick with the single use production, and that's still the majority of the production in the U.S. The growing hemp for fiber. As you can see here, it grows up tall, plant it relatively close together. It's a relatively slender plant. It's much like, if you're familiar with it, growing hay. You're going to grow up a large forage plant, you're going to cut it, potentially rake it, and then bale it. So you're going to have these very heavy bales of biomass that have to be transported to a processing plant. Thus, being close to a processing plant is of importance for not only the grower, but also the processor, in that it cuts down on the transportation cost of hauling all this heavy biomass to the processing plant. So what we generally see is a processing plant is formed, and then the growers are within a small radius around that plant, growing the fiber to feed that plant. But fiber currently has limited processing capacity across this country. There's just a small amount of large processing facilities in this country. The fiber industry is just now really kind of starting to take roots and hold. The processing is coming on, but it's still developing. And the fiber market as itself has a huge potential. There's a number of products that can be used from the fiber processing side of hemp. But those end products still have to be economical to compete with the competitors that are already on the market. And so it'll be interesting to see how this fiber market develops as we move forward. Growing hemp for grain. There is a challenge of seed shatter with growing hemp for grain. Hemp for grain is grown like most grain crops. Or let's just take wheat, for example. It grows up, you use a combine to harvest the seed. There is a difference here, though, in that a lot of times on a hemp plant, the seed doesn't all mature at the same time, like it is with a lot of plants, but a lot of these plants have had years and years of breeding to get the seed to mature at the same time. Hemp isn't quite there yet, and so a lot of times we end up with seed shatter because some of the seed on the bottom will mature faster than the seed on the top, and then you get some shatter. So a lot of times you'll have to harvest it potentially a bit maybe green and have to be dried. And due to human consumption, the seed needs to be cleaned and stored properly. This is not something you could just take down to your local elevator and have them store it for you. So in general, you'll need a contract with someone who's going to take this and store it in a proper manner. Whole hemp seed and hemp seed protein powder, hemp seed oil are generally recognized as safe by the FDA. They have that GRAS designation by the FDA, in part because hemp seeds have been around and been used for human consumption for a while now, a long time, and hemp seed is essentially free of THC and CBD. Thus, the FDA gave it this designation. So that leads me to this point. Hemp seed oil is different than CBD oil. Now, I think a lot of folks get them confused, and sometimes in marketing, I think it's confusing when you see products. Hemp seed oil is essentially hemp grain that is crushed. You get the oil from it, much like you would, say, a soybean. Crush a soybean, get soybean oil. Crush a sunflower seed, get sunflower seed oil. Same thing with this. Hemp seed oil is the crushed seeds that oil comes from. CBD is different. CBD is extracted from the plant. It's actually a molecule, and in its form is kind of really a white powder in its purest form, and it's put into an oil as kind of a conduit to transport the CBD. So there are different things here, and that's something to be, whether you're just purchasing hemp or you're growing hemp, it's important to know the difference between those two. Growing hemp for cannabinoids, in particular, I'm going to talk about CBD. CBD has been driving the train. It's getting most of the headlines, has gotten most of the headlines, and it's been the majority of the planted acres in the United States so far. But prices have fallen considerably, particularly since 2019. The price has fallen by 80% for biomass used for production of CBD. So the supply and demand is trying to find an equilibrium. It's not that different to have a beginning industry that had limited supply, had really high prices, which drew more growers into the market. Supply went up, price came down. There's this balance going on, and we're trying to find an equilibrium of where that plays out. The question of whether CBD and all cannabinoids really in this essence, if they're a supplement or if they're a drug / medicine, that answer is going to have large implications for how CBD cannabinoids are regulated going forward, and will have large implications for demand from the consumer side. If you're going to grow large numbers of acres of hemp for CBD, your harvesting approach is going to be key, particularly if you're going to use a mechanized harvesting approach. Let's say do your research to make sure that you have one that fits your operation. Just some final thoughts. There are many opportunities in hemp and will be going forward, but there's still a considerable amount of uncertainty and risk in the industry. Markets are going to be developed, and development for grain and fiber are going to be important in particular. CBD is driving the market, where supply and demand kind of find an equilibrium, and where that price settles at will be important for growers and processors. And generally, processing in all levels of the hemp industry kind of needs to catch up with the supply that's on the market. Touched on contracts a little bit. Contracts are going to be vital for growers. It's important that you know what you're responsible for and what your processor is responsible for, and if there are any outs the processor can use to get out of paying that contract to you. In general, hemp is going to be another alternative crop that some growers will want to put into their portfolio. The only thing is, it appears that the so-called silver bullet days, where these large outside returns, those appear to be over. So with that, I hope you learned something from our video, and look forward to seeing you in our next one. Thanks.